Right now, I mean, shipment count is down, right?
Yeah.
So we're seeing some clients that are down 30, 35%, right?
We've partnered with Ascend TMS, the world's most popular and top-rated transportation management system. It's the ultimate tool for all your freight needs. You can use our referral code RA-FreightCaviar to receive 3 months of Ascend TMS for free. It only takes 20 seconds to sign up and no credit card is required. You can click the link below to learn more. Rasmus Nielsen, the CEO at Caliber Inc. Rasmus, thanks for taking the time to talk to us today.
Yeah,
You
thanks
do
for
a lot
having me.
of Yeah, of course. You do a lot of talent hunting in the industry, and you also hail from Denmark. So I do want to
Yes.
begin this podcast today with a little, if you could just introduce yourself and then
Yeah.
take us back to, you growing up in Denmark and
Yeah.
getting into the logistics industry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And thanks for having me. Yeah, so for me, originally from Denmark, although I have lived in the US for 23 years now, but grew up mainly in Denmark. I took high school in Portugal. So that's kind of where I learned English. And I think I got the kind of a broad international, vibe from that. But in Denmark, so I was done with high school, moved back to Denmark, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. Honestly, I was pretty tired of school, which is crazy when I think about it now. And, I have two kids and you're already now they're 12 talking about college. I decided that I didn't want to go to a 4-year college because I was just tired of the books. So what we have in Denmark is you have the apprenticeship model where you take 1 year of kind of basic college. Here in the US, you would equate it to getting rid of your gen eds. So you do that, and then you find an apprenticeship with a company. I did it with a trucking company, and then you work for 3 months. You work from 8 to 5. In my case, I started out dispatching trucks to Norway back and forth. Then you go to school for a month, and you actually go to school for logistics. They teach you about Incoterms. They teach you about regulations and maritime law and all that stuff. And then you go back and work for 3 months. So 3 months working, 1 month school, 3 months working, and you do that for 2 years. And then at the end, you take your exams and you graduate, so to say, right? But you get paid, not a lot, probably like $1,000 a month when you're a trainee. But it is cool because it's kind of on the job learning, right? So I rotated. I did dispatching to and from Norway. I did dispatching to and from Sweden, dispatching to and from Germany. And then they also have one of the things where, that was kind of an eye opener for me is that you have to join a truck twice during these 2 years where you actually go with them, you sleep in the cab, you hang out with the other. I went up to Norway, you hang out with the other truckers on the ferry and stuff like that. So a very, very unique experience. And then when I graduated with those 2 years, I was actually going to move to Germany. I was doing dispatching to and from Germany, and a lot of friends down in the offices down in Germany. And I was 19 at the time. So, Friday night, I would give the paperwork to one of the drivers, and then I would jump on the truck and I'd head down to Hamburg and I would party all weekend. And then I would take the same truck back Sunday. And, you can do that when you're 19 and you only need like 2 or 3 hours of sleep and you don't really care where that is, right?
Sure.
So I was going to move to Germany, but the company I worked for then was acquired at the time by Danzas and then DHL, and then everything kind of fell through. And I was a little bummed and I thought, okay, well, I guess I'll take a year or two here in Denmark and then figure it out. But then all of a sudden I had a long lost uncle that was visiting from Chicago, and, got talking to him. I hadn't seen him since I was 10, and, we chatted, and obviously he asked what I did, and I told him, and he said, well, it just so happens that, I have a small logistics company in a suburb in Chicago. At the time I was a little cocky, and I said, because I felt I was doing very well. And I said, well, no offense, even though I haven't, seen you since I was 10, I don't really want to work for family, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, well, don't worry. I don't really work. I golf every day. I have a younger partner taking over the company. So, you would work for him. I said, oh, okay, cool. And 2 weeks later, I showed up with 2 suitcases, and I was supposed to be here for 2 years, and then that's 23 years ago, right?
Wow.
So he had a small freight forwarding company in a suburb called Glen Ellen, and we were doing a lot of export reefer containers and so forth. I showed up and start to learn how things are done in the U.S. And then I run into this NMFC code class, which just absolutely makes no sense to me, because a pallet is a pallet. A pallet that weighs 500 pounds. Why does a pallet of CDs? Well, at the time we had CDs, right? Why was a pallet of CDs cost more than a pallet of books, for instance, if they weigh the same, right? So didn't make sense, and it was kind of all the agents we had overseas. They were super annoyed by it. I kind of complained a little bit to my boss. And then, lo and behold, my uncle, he's a big golfer. He's out golfing one day with one of his buddies, who was at the time the president of Landstar. And they were talking, and the guy said, "Oh, you should start a Landstar agency," and blah, blah, blah. So my uncle came back to me and said, "Hey, this whole NMFC thing and trucking, and your background is trucking. Do you think you could do anything if we opened a Landstar agency?" And I said, "Absolutely." So what I did was I went to all my other friends that were freight forwarders that had the same issue. One of our biggest clients that became our biggest clients, my roommate worked there, was a company called Shipco, kind of a big company. And we put together kind of a web rater, booked everything at class 77, and then we're off, right? So that was kind of fun. Did that. I think after a year and a half, we were doing 100 shipments a day. I got my own little office and kind of separated a little bit from my uncle's company. So that was my first kind of introduction to, I would say, freight brokerage here in the U.S. And it was a lot of fun.
That's a good background story.
It's a lot. That was a lot there, man. That was good.
Yeah. A lot to unpack. I've told these stories at bars many times, as you can hear.
Reed, any questions for us?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that was something that I'm always curious about is, and both of you can kind of like talk about this somewhat. Rasmus probably a little more than Paul. He's not a native, but like, how does European logistics, how does the system in Denmark and in Germany and wherever you worked in all your years, how does it compare? Like, what's better about it? What's different? You mentioned NMFC codes as being an annoying thing. Like, what? I guess I'm interested in that, in the distinctions between the two systems, or
Yeah. I would say, and obviously a lot of it has evolved here in the U.S. in the last, I came in 2000, right? So a lot of it has evolved since, right? But when I came, primarily freight was kind of an industry that you kind of fell into, right? People would, maybe they would apply at a bank, and they would apply at a trucking company, and they just ended up getting hired by the trucking company, and guess what? Now they're in freight, right? And where I grew up, to work in it, you have to actually have a degree in it. Right. So you start out as a trainee, and I do feel that people take a little bit more pride in it, in kind of being that, being a logistics person or a freight forwarder or a dispatcher. Right. So when I came over here, I remember one of the first times we had I was moving an oversized flatbed, and it loaded. It was a machine, $250,000 in value, loaded, on a Thursday, and he has to make it out to the port by Monday, and going out of Baltimore. And he's loaded, and then my uncle, I'm about to leave for the day, and he said, "Hey, how did the load go?" I said, "Oh, it's loaded. Everything's good." He said, "Oh, okay. Did you follow up with the trucker and just make sure everything's okay?" I'm like, "Well, I mean, he's loaded. I mean, he's on the way to Baltimore. Like, what can happen?" Right? So, anyway, next day show, it turns out that the guy left the truck on the south side of Chicago and ran away with the gas money. So, my mind was just blown. Like, how can this happen, and how can somebody just do that, right? And there's a piece worth $250,000 just sitting at the side of the road.
Hey there, amazing listeners. If you're enjoying what you're hearing on our podcast, we need your support. It will only take a moment, but it would mean the world to us. Please make sure to hit the like button on this video, subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to share with one of your friends that would enjoy our content. Your engagement helps us reach more people and bring more awesome episodes to you. Thanks a million, and thanks for being part of the podcast community.
Wow.
Yeah. I think those things that was a big learning curve for me. I remember, at the time we were sending faxes to people. I dispatching a truck, sent a fax, and again, they're like, okay, well, did you call to make sure they received the fax? I'm like, well, I called and gave them the load and told I would send the fax in an order. And they're like, no, you got to call and make sure they receive the fax. So it was just this whole thing that it seemed a lot of the times people weren't on the other side catching the ball and kind of wanting to run with it, if you know what I mean, right? There was constant kind of follow up.
Sure.
I wasn't used to that.
Yeah. So it's like your uncle probably told you like, welcome to America after you realized that. And like, I like the fact that like in Denmark and overall, I think in Europe, people take more pride because it's something they go and get the degree in. It's something they're more passionate about. Whereas you're right, in America, you kind of fall into it. I, for one, I have a degree in psychology, bachelor's degree. And during career fair in my last year in college, I run into my fraternity brother at the career fair, and he's there with his dad's company. And they start telling me about logistics and freight brokering. I had no idea what it was. And he got me an interview, got me the job, and that's how I got into the industry. And I think Reed has a similar story with the philosophy
literally
degree.
Basically the exact same thing.
So I do appreciate that. And I think from your story, you're shocked that this happened in the States, where you had a driver just kind of leave the truck with $250,000 equipment on it. And whereas like in Denmark or Europe, that wouldn't have happened, right? Like that's just something that
would never have happened.
Yeah.
But also just to talk about, so my father was in shipping, my uncle is in shipping, my sister works in shipping. So
in Denmark,
in Denmark,
shipping runs in the Danish blood.
Yeah,
it does. It goes back. I think it goes back to the Vikings, but unfortunately, it's illegal to rape and plunder nowadays. So we had to kind of venture outside that, expand on it a little bit.
I went to when I was in Stockholm last month. I went to the Vasa Museum, which was so it has like that shipwreck, the oldest shipwreck that's actually sustained. They lifted it out of the water in the 1960s, I believe, and they were basically like mentioning how back like I think in the 17th century, like so you had London building essentially the ships, London, Amsterdam, and then like the Vikings were known to build like these beautiful ships, and they would go and rape and plunder. They would go to war, but they were a very, very smart people, and they were very capable of coming together and building a ship back then was just something that required sophistication, engineering, lots of wood, and then the location for Denmark and Copenhagen, kind of being, I guess, you have a major port in Denmark, and Maersk is based out of Denmark as well.
Maersk is Danish, DSV is Danish.
Yeah.
So some of the biggest shipping companies in the world are Danish, which is strong, right? I mean, such a small world with 5.8 million. You could drop us in Lake Michigan and there'll be like a little wave, and that was that, right? It is interesting. And Maersk, Maersk is it's the company that everybody wants to work for, right? And when I was growing up, everybody applies. I applied for a traineeship there, but they take 30 every year, right? That's it. 30 trainees every year. And I think they had, when I applied, I think there was something like 1,400 people that applied.
Wow.
And you go in there, you have like 6 rounds of interviews. You have to wear suits. They put you through a background test and then all this stuff. And I remember, I think on day 2, I kind of realized that this wasn't going to happen. And the guy's like, so, where do you see yourself in 5 years? I'm like, well, it depends upon if I win the lottery or not. But, but they're very, very formal. One person asked like, hey, is it true if you walk in the hallways, you have to have your buttons on your jacket buttoned? And the guy's like, yeah, well, why else would there be buttons? Fast forward to today, and and especially in freight brokerage, everybody's wearing shorts and t-shirts and hats, and that definitely doesn't fly there.
Sure. Do you like I guess like have you taken anything from like your culture in Denmark, and like I guess when you're talent hunting and you have a company that does recruiting, do you have you seen that you've taken any of like that bits of like taking pride more in the job and like trying to put that into your company. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. So for me, I mean, freight is my passion, and then you know, I'm lucky that I can combine it with recruiting, because it's always been my passion to recruit, to find people with no experience, develop them, train them, coach them, and so forth. So for me, I go full-fledged on the passion. I'm super passionate about it. I have candidates that I placed you know, years ago that I still meet up with. I still, you know, look over their career plan and coach them and mentor them and give them advice. So I'm very sure that anybody that's ever worked with me knows that the door is always open. We can always talk, and I will always give advice. So I would say for me, it's always a long game. You know, it's never just, you know, play somebody, hope they last 90 days, and you know, let's see what happens, right? I also, every customer that I work with, I go visit. I go see the office. I talk to the leadership. We have statistics that we can pull. We can see what is the turnover at this company. Obviously, we pull it on LinkedIn, so it's not 100%, but we look at that, right? Because I don't want to place people with companies that have a terrible culture. Especially, as you know, in freight brokerage, there are some of them out there that you know, they just burn and turn people. They don't respect people's careers. You know, they hire people in sales. They have them upload everything into the CRM system. If they don't perform in 4 months, they kick them out, and then they hold them to their non-compete and don't let them call on any of those customers for a year or 2 years, right? So companies like that, we simply just don't work with.
I respect that. Reed, you're sitting over there, a little bit quiet. Any questions?
That's yeah. I mean, I guess, like, how did you, I mean, I'm curious how you got into recruiting, how you got into kind of like headhunting, placement, that sort of stuff. Like, I want to hear that story.
Yeah. So for me, it was weird because I was the guy that all my friends would come to and be like, "Hey, man, I'm thinking of getting a new job. Do you know anybody?" I've always had a big network, and I had several of my friends that I got jobs with other companies that I didn't even work for, but before I did recruiting. So I came to a point in my career where I had worked 18 years on the freight side. I had so I left my uncle's company. I went to a company called Scan Global Logistics, where I became the branch manager of the Chicago branch. It was a 3-person branch, and we grew it to almost 15 people. I was a selling branch manager, so I was the only one selling. I would literally, I sold my heart out, and, you know, super passionate about it. You know, did some good stuff there. The company was then acquired or merged with another company. So I moved on to a company called Panalpina, fantastic company. You know, I kind of sold my heart out there. Then I went to a company called RIM, did the same thing. So came to a point where I was at RIM, and it was time for me to leave. But I was like, you know, I've been so passionate the last 3 companies. You know, do I want to go do this at a 4th company? So it was a little bit of a, you know, come to Jesus moment where I thought, you know, well, what am I going to do? You know, do I want to take a leap? And that's, you know, when everything kind of came together for me, and, you know, the recruiting was something I was always passionate about. I saw that there was a kind of a big gap in the industry. A lot of people hiring bad people. A lot of people had bad hiring practices. And so yeah, just took the leap. At that time, joined a previous colleague, and together we built a recruiting company on the logistics side, and that was in 2017, and we did that until 2021. We had a slight falling out, and then we parted ways, and I started Caliber. So it was I'd say it's very organic, but I think if I look back at my career, every job I've had has been about building something and developing something. And I think that's what I'm truly passionate about.
I'm curious, Rasmus, a bit. Reed, were you about to say something?
No, go ahead.
So
I think you'll probably ask what I'm going to ask. Go
well,
ahead.
I was wondering, because I know that you work with a lot of freight forwarding companies, so this is maybe a little bit different. And I know you work with freight forwarding and freight brokerages. Could you just quickly kind of explain to us, just for listeners that don't maybe understand? And I get the idea of what the difference between a freight forwarder and a freight broker is. I just kind of guess I want a better explanation. Can you dive in a little bit? Tell us what are the differences between a freight forwarder and a freight broker, and like you know, like the companies that you work with, kind of like what kind of talent are you seeking?
Yeah, absolutely. So on the freight forwarder side, that is about 70% of our business today. And those are companies that they either import or export to and from the US, right? So it could be ocean freight shipments coming from China. It could be an air freight shipment going to Germany. The companies that handle that. So like we already mentioned DSV. DSV is one of our largest clients. So they have DSV Air and Sea. And that's what they do. They do also have DSV Road, which is on the domestic side, that we also work with them, recruiting talent for freight brokerage. And then obviously on the freight brokerage and trucking side, that's all domestic freight here in the US, full loads, partials, expedited, you name it. So that's kind of how we split it up.
Okay, got it. Reed, any follow-ups there?
That's interesting. How do you find recruiting differs between the two kind of buckets you're dealing with, freight brokerage and freight forwarding?
Yeah. So on the freight forwarding side, the sale is a lot longer sale. So it can take on average 4 to 5 months to close a client.
Mm-hmm. You mean as a freight forwarder, it takes that, like the sales cycle is longer, like doing the job itself. Okay.
Or
no. Closing the account.
Like for recruiting, like in the sense like getting a freight forwarding company, right? No. Okay.
No, if you're a sales rep for a freight forwarder.
Got it.
Okay.
It take you 4 to 5, sometimes even a year to close an account. Freight forwarding sales is done in person. Mm-hmm. So you get a meeting with a client, you go visit them, you uncover their needs, all that stuff. So it's harder for a customer to switch freight forwarders because you have to sign power of attorneys, you have to get all your import documentation, you have to notify, let's say, the factory in China that you're switching over to a new logistics provider. Where so that I say that's one of the main differences is the sales cycle, and I've done both. I've done sales on the freight forwarding side. I've done it on the freight brokerage side, and then whereas on the freight brokerage side, as you can make a dial, and the customer's like, oh, fantastic, I'll go with you. Send me a credit app, and we're ready to go. So one of the main things is that the sales cycle is a lot longer on the international side. However, once you have a customer, they tend to stick with you a lot longer because it is harder to make a change.
So you think that you're just recruiting, like the types of people you're recruiting for a freight forwarder role are just different than the types of people you're recruiting and placing in a brokerage role. Do you like, you're more often than not probably dealing on the freight forwarder side with people who are like established in the industry, right? Or have worked in the industry before. Have you ever seen somebody, like, have you ever had somebody come to you maybe for a freight brokerage role and you're like, hey, have you ever tried, you thought they might be good on the forwarding side, and like, okay, I'm interested in that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are some, and and I do talk to sales executives coming from the freight brokerage side, and they're burned out. Yeah. Right. They're like, I'm doing $100 a day. I get 4 people on the phone. Maybe a week I close 3 clients. Right. And it's just a grind. And it's a tough grind. I mean, it's so if we switch them over to freight forwarding, it's more you're doing a few calls, you're setting up 4 to 5, maybe 5 to 6 in-person meetings every week. So it's a little bit more of a long-term play. And some of the people that I interview, and I can hear that they have a little bit more, maybe a strategic mindset, that they would transition well over to selling on the freight forwarding side.
I wanted to add, I think culturally speaking, from a company perspective, freight forwarders are more professional than freight brokers, where, as a freight forwarder, you have to like come in, nice shirt, maybe tie a suit, whereas freight broker, you just go in shorts and, short sleeve. So that's also like a difference. So it's a little it's like leveling up a little bit in a way.
I would say in a way, but obviously there are obviously exceptions to the rule, but they do handle, if you handle an ocean freight shipment, I mean, you have the file in your hand for 30 to 40 days. Right. Whereas, as we know in the freight brokerage, I mean, you pick it up, you deliver it 2 days later, it's gone.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
you might not even call them after they pick it up.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I will say, interestingly enough, talking to a lot of the freight brokerage, and typically the freight brokerage guys that are recruited into freight brokerage, they come from college.
Yeah.
Right. And there are a lot of the operations people in freight forwarding that don't have a 4-year degree. So there's a little bit of a difference there. So it's not necessarily always leveling up, but because on the freight brokerage side, the freight brokerage is a lot more transactional. But the people that get into it, and typically, you hear stories about, where they go and they try and recruit the party guys from the schools, the ones in the fraternity, all that stuff, right? The ones that are going to be able to, that are competitive, that want to do the cold calling, that, don't take no for an answer, that can form relationships and all that stuff, right? They don't typically hire the engineer to do freight brokerage sales, right? So it's a lot. I think it's a lot with personality.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like in freight forwarding, there's less shadiness, less fraud. It's more just like you're dealing with big shipping lines that are all kind of set up. There's only a decent amount of shipping lines out there. Very, very interesting. What have you seen like in terms of this year from like a hiring perspective? Like, as we all know, the market's been down, so like you've probably experienced that, and you could see what's going on. What are the changes that you've seen on the forwarding side and on the brokerage side? Yeah.
So I mean, right now, shipment count is down, right? So we're seeing some clients that are down 30-35%, right? On top of the volumes being down, the margins are also considerably down. Right. And it goes to both. So there's just less freight, right? So right now, everybody wants to hire salespeople. Everybody wants to hire somebody with a book of business. And everybody just wants market share, right? And I fully understand it, because everybody is trying to hire salespeople with a book of business so they can keep the employees that they have. So for us, the majority of the positions that we're working on right now are sales, or the advantage of working with a recruiting company is that, let's say that you have an operations manager, and maybe he or she is not quite cutting it, but you can't fire the person now because then you have a big gap, and you can't advertise that you're looking for somebody. So you can go to somebody like me, and I can do a confidential search, and find you a replacement, and you can level up, right? So those are the type of roles that we're working on right now.
Got it.
I also, I think you were at the same conference where the guy, he said that COVID was a sugar high and we're crashing from the sugar high, right? And I think that's like the best analogy. But I also think that people really underestimate what COVID did. Because I mean, there's some people, there's some younger people that we talk to, they've never not really worked in a COVID. Maybe they came out of college in 2020, right? So all they know is COVID, right? And then you have people that, you're sent home. Now you're working from home. You have time for your family, or you have time to do travel and do other stuff. And now all of a sudden it's like, boom, no, guess what? We're going back to the office. We're going back to 2019. And I mean, I wouldn't say people have PTSD, but people had to change so fast because of COVID. And now people are having a hard time adjusting and kind of going back, right? So I think a lot of employers, they underestimate what effect COVID had on people.
Okay. Makes sense. Reed, anything to add on?
Yeah, I mean, that's Paul and I were just in Chicago together or whatever, two or three weeks ago, and we went to some offices, and including my former employer in the city, Echo, and we were walking around, and I worked in the office there briefly, and just pre-COVID, and when COVID started, I was there. and just comparing and contrasting, just like the actual kind of, even just the energy and the vibe in the office.
Yeah.
It's just like night and day, like
Exactly.
compared to pre-COVID. And it's just like, yeah, it's because, top performers are likely have a longer leash and can go work from home as much as they want. So you don't have like the top dogs in the office all the time. The leadership might not be there all the time. Like the new reps who they really need to keep under their thumb because they are new hires, because they are fresh out of college and have no idea what's going on. Like they, aren't necessarily always around the high performers, which is like a thing, so it's certainly, I totally agree with you that it is, the impact is lasting, right? Even if we go back to the office, the impact is still lasting.
Yeah, no, and I look at profiles and people that have had 3 jobs since 2020.
Yeah.
And so my hiring manager is like, oh, they don't look stable. I'm like, well, you have to understand this is COVID, right? They take the jobs they can get, then they get laid off, or the market was so great. So you're 23 years old, and somebody calls you with a $10,000 raise. Yeah, people are going to jump ship, right? So it's almost like you have to really be understanding when you look at people's profile and not judge them based on what happened the past 2 or 3 years.
I get the sense that a lot of these companies, even like I'm talking to more mid-market brokerages these days. These guys all have recruiters too. Many of them have own recruiters on staff.
Yes.
And so I'm curious, you're probably not really hiring for the entry level roles. Like that's probably not your bread and butter, right? Like you're probably hiring for more specialized stuff, right?
So yes and no. So we hire everything from on the freight brokerage, carrier sales, customer sales, high level sales, operations managers, all that stuff. And then on the freight forwarding side, import agents. I mean, so we do hire at all levels. And I have clients that they do have their own talent acquisition people, and they're great people, right? But the thing is that if you don't know freight, you don't know freight. So you can interview somebody and you can be like, oh, this person's a nice guy. This person's got great grades was an Eagle Cub Scout and will probably be good in freight, but it doesn't always translate, right? So one of the things that for my company, we're a team of 11 and everybody has worked in freight before. My top recruiter on the domestic side, he's 27 years old. I think you might have met him, Paul, at the Cornhole. He's 27 years old. He's done carrier sales. He's done customer sales. So I mean, for him, when he's recruiting, he's talking to himself. When we talk to when we consider taking on a new client, we ask into the commission plan, we ask into the culture, we go visit them, right? So we know what's a good company and what's not a bad company. So when we talk to, even if they're green and they're straight out of college, we can explain to them why they should go work for this company and not work for these 5 other companies that have a terrible culture or. I mean, again, don't want to talk bad about anybody, but you threw it out there the other day. For me, I mean, anybody that goes out of college and takes a job with TQL, setting themselves up for failure, right? I mean, the amount of people that we want to try and save from there, but those non-competes are just so tough, right?
That's an interesting thing to talk about too, because you're probably encountering that a lot. What you get a call from a rep looking for a gig, or you get a call on somebody applying for a gig. That's probably the first thing you ask them, right?
Yes. Well, and if I mean, think about it, right? I mean, they hire somebody right out of college. They make them sign a 2-year non-compete, right? Mm-hmm. And when you're right out of college, you're like, well, that doesn't matter. I mean, I'll sell freight for 3-4 years, and then I'll switch industries. Well, guess what? Then you become good at it, and now you're stuck, and you have this 2-year non-compete, and I think it's absolutely horrendous that any company would tie somebody like that, right?
I'm curious, how effective are the non-competes? Because I know it's a state by state differences in terms of if they could actually implement them, and so in Illinois, for example, if someone sends a non-compete and then they go work for their competitor, how sticky are those non-competes in Illinois?
Yeah, so it all depends upon the company. right? Because unfortunately here in America, if somebody sues you, you have to pay for your own legal counsel, right? Mm-hmm. So in Denmark, the loser pays for all legal costs.
Okay.
Right? So here, if a company has a ton of money and they're pissed off, they can just keep hiring lawyers, and you have to pay your lawyers to defend. And that's why most lawsuits they end in some kind of settlement, right? Sometimes it doesn't even matter who's right or wrong. I have a really good friend of mine, and he was sued by one of the freight brokerages, and it ended up costing him over $200,000.
Oh,
yeah. And that was here.
And it also scares it's also just a scare tactic, right? Like a rep leaves, XYZ broker, they've got a non-compete, like they're always going to be looking over their shoulder, right? Yeah. Even if they're not in violation of it. Like if they get a message or they get a letter in the mail, like that can be just like very intimidating.
Oh, absolutely. And I see some reps that they're like, okay, well, then they move. They'll move to California because the law out there is a little, but we mentioned TQL before. It's all governed out of Cincinnati, Ohio, right? The documents, right? And again, you're 21 years old, you graduate college, you don't know this stuff, right?
Yeah, and you just need a paycheck. You're just trying to get some money. You just start making some money.
I mean, I had last year a guy that I met on the streets of Chicago, and I did a random interview about asking him like, what's a freight broker? It's like it was a really funny interview, and then this guy like ended up getting a proposition from TQL like a month after this interview, and he was actually looking for a job, and I literally was telling him like, don't sign those documents. I was like, I told him like I literally begged this guy like, don't sign the documents, and but he was like, I need the money, like I need this job, so he just ended up signing the documents, and I think he was there for like 4 months and then left. So and then he was like kind of like obviously disappointed that he didn't listen to me, but I mean people need money, especially when they're young or without a job, so they'll get the like TQL seems to hire a lot of people, and it's like they go and they sign it. So I guess the most difficult thing is you're going to be paying these law fees or lawyer fees, because even if like, let's say in Illinois where maybe the non-compete laws aren't that sticky, and the judge might rule that it's not doesn't affect the person or whatnot, it's still you're paying the lawyers a lot. So okay, I mean that makes sense. Okay, got it. I did want to talk a little bit about a trend that you've mentioned that you wanted to talk about a little bit, and Reed and I talked about this on the podcast that we recorded 2 days ago with the Freight 360 guys, and it seems like there's a trend where the best salespeople or the best where customer sales reps or carrier sales reps, they get promoted to leadership roles, but they might be lacking leadership skills. Can you kind of share like your observations and its impacts on a role on the industry?
Absolutely. And this has been kind of so I also do on the side, I do leadership training. I also do sales training. So a lot of the times what we see is that the best sales rep or the best carrier sales, or if it's freight forwarding, the one that handles the most files will get promoted to supervisor, which is great. And then they might get promoted to manager. But for some reason in logistics, we don't believe in training people. We don't believe in giving them the tools, right? And we're setting them up for failure. And I can talk about it firsthand because I talked before when I worked for my uncle. I started this little freight brokerage. I had 5 employees. I was 24 years old, and I didn't know how to. I mean, I always kind of consider myself I'm a little bit of a leader, but I didn't. Being a leader is one thing. Being a leader is motivating people and getting them to work. Being a manager is also having those tough conversations, coaching them the right way, and all this stuff. And honestly, for me, it was we had a problem file that just put on my desk, and and then that pile just kept growing, right? And I'm sitting working until 8, 9 o'clock, and my team members, they'd leave at 5. But that's just because I didn't know how to delegate, right? I also one of the things that I'm big on is having tough conversations. I didn't know how to have tough conversations, right? So it's all of these tools that for some reason in logistics we just don't believe in training people that. And we really set them up for failure. Now, during COVID, everybody was booming. Now you might have a person that is fantastic at leading a team of 3 carrier sales. Well, boom, everything was booming, and now that person's got 40 carrier sales underneath him or her, right? But you still haven't trained them, and I think that there's a huge gap in that, and that I also think is a huge reason for the turnover. Because you have bad managers and people don't want to work for them, and sometimes those bad managers, it might not even be their fault, but they just have so much pressure and they've never been taught the tools to lead and develop a team.
Yeah. So
they
go ahead.
Yeah. So the Freight 360 guys said something interesting that I want to hear your take on. Was like, a lot of times managers are expected to also be selling, and like because for many of them, they're a good salesperson, they've got a good book of business, and so the logical step is, oh yeah, let's make them a manager. And so they still are the most effective people at managing their book, so they keep them in a sales role and managing, and on top of that, they're also like we've alluded to, tend to be managing and responsible for a bunch of people who are super green, have never been in this industry, and it's frankly just like the stress involved in this industry obviously contributes to the turnover too, because when you're constantly being lied to and when stuff's always going wrong and it might not be your fault but you're still getting blamed, like that's stressful long term. So if you're a manager and you're responsible for managing a book of business and you've got all these reps and you're really just a salesperson, right, with a manager hat on, and you've got all these people who are super stressed out and worked up and dealing with all these issues, man, that's like an impossible job, right? That's a really hard job. That's a hard job. So talk about that.
Yeah, no, you're 100%. And also, if you're a selling sales manager and you have a target on your own back, right? So when that great lead comes in, you take it yourself.
Yeah.
Whereas your job as a manager is obviously, let's say you're managing a team of 10. So if you can get that team of 10 up to doing 100 grand a month in GP, that's obviously better than you yourself doing 300 Gs, right? So, I mean, the numbers are just there. So by having a manager having his or her own target, it's not good. I can understand that if you have, I've had roles where I was a sales manager and my goal was just to cover my own seat. And I get that. Then you have free resource, all that stuff, and you do that with a few customers, everything's fine, and you get that nut out, and then it's time to really focus on the team and make them better and get those 10 reps to do $1 million a year each in profit, right? So yeah, no, it's totally setting people up for failure. The other thing about training is also, when you hire new people, right? And there's a big lack in getting them trained adequately. But why go through the process of hiring somebody if you don't have time to train them? You don't have time to onboard them. A lot of the people fall out of love with the company right when they get hired because there is no onboarding. It's just like, oh, hey, follow this guy for a week and then you're on.
There's no onboarding, but there's also no setting of expectations of how hard the job is. You know what I mean?
Yes.
I mean, part of it makes sense because if you're a recruiter, you want to make the position look attractive, and you're not going to open with, hey, like this is really stressful, and like you're probably going to lose sleep, and you're probably going to get a bunch of unwanted phone calls with people mad at you. Like you're not going to open with that in your pitch to a candidate.
Exactly, but the office you're going to be working has a ping pong table, so it's all good.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the culture.
So no, I mean, there's definitely that, right? And then I think also a lot of times, when people interview, like, oh, we'll pay you $35,000, and then rest is commission, and you see that guy over there, he makes $300,000 a year. So and it's like, well, I mean, it's so hard to achieve nowadays for a 21-year-old coming right out of college, right?
It's funny you said that, Rasmus, because like when I started off, I was making, I think it was $33,000 a year, and I was making commission, but I wasn't in commission for 6 months, and I was promised uncapped commission, and it was like 10% flat after obviously like my salary for the month, and then literally right when I was about to get commission turned on, they changed the whole commission structure to where it was like team oriented, and like there was 3 levels of carrier sales reps, and like I ended up making, I think, $45,000 in the first year, but like I would have probably made like 60K if it wasn't for the commission change. And they really like just like screwed me. And I remember the first week we were in training, our trainer, who was great trainer, great training program altogether. But he was like telling us about how like the number one customer sales rep guy like makes like $500,000 a year. And at that point, the TMS was still like able to like pull up like commission reports, even though they ended up changing that pretty quickly on. But like you could tell, like he was making $50,000 a month, and everyone's like, "Wow, that's amazing! Like this guy's crushing it." And like he's coming in like at noon. He works for a few hours in the office. It was back in 2015, and then leaving. And like it's like they're selling this. They're like kind of like making it like seem like, oh, this is possible. You just got to crush it. And then it turns out that this guy got in at the right time, and like the CEO gave him all like of the best accounts, just gave it to him. Exactly. And that's how he was making his money. But I mean, at the end of the day, it's definitely something that you see a lot in the industry, and it is a tough industry. But I'm curious, like from what you've seen, what you've experienced, what are your plans for Caliber? And I don't know, like if you could tell us maybe a little bit about like what you foresee in the industry changes moving forward, since we just mentioned COVID, and now we're obviously post COVID. How do you see the industry going forward?
Absolutely. So number one, how do I see the industry and what's changing, right? So obviously we talked a little bit about people are returning to the office. I think it is inevitable. It's been so hard to build that culture. Do you remember the movie The Breakup with Jennifer Aniston?
Yes. The Breakup, was that with Vince Vaughn? Yeah, of course, the one in Chicago. Yeah. So she goes, they have a big fight, and she goes, I want you to want to do the dishes, right? And he's like, I'm never going to want to do the dishes, right? But it's kind of the same, I want you to want to come into the office. And people are like, well, I'm never going to want to. But it's kind of that thing that you need some kind of hybrid. I think a hybrid is ideal, but you need some kind of in-office camaraderie, building that culture. And if you look at on the freight broker side, historically, the companies like Command and Echo and all this stuff, right? They were built and they were so successful because they had a culture, right? And people wanted to go to the office, right? So I think we're going to return to that. And then the other thing, I think a little bit more long term, I think technology obviously is going to change everything, and it's a very broad term, right? But I think right now the logistics managers on the shipper side are way more educated than they were 10, 15 years ago. With technology, they're getting way more tools to work smarter. So I think that the big challenge we're going to have is everything is going to be so technology based that it's going to make competition harder, and it's going to make it harder for a logistics provider to stand out. Right. So if a logistics manager is really educated about what's going on in the industry, he's probably following Freightcaviar's newsletter. But if he has all the IT at his fingertips, they didn't have that 10, 15 years ago, where they're more susceptible to, using 5 brokers, whoever calls them in the morning gets the load. Right. So I think that's where companies really have to adapt. Sure. And then your second question was, what's the future of Caliber? For us, I mean, we're niche, so we only focus on logistics. We don't need to be the biggest, but we need to be the best. So we're continuing our culture, we're continuing educating everybody, and we're continuing to pick the best companies to work for. So it's a lot about reputation, it's a lot about network. If I place candidates at a shitty company, it backfires. Right. Yeah. I think anytime in this industry, if you play the short game, it's just never going to work out for you. And hopefully Caliber goal is to be around for another 20 years, and we live on our reputation. Love that. Reed, any final questions?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the recruiting, it's interesting that at what point did you realize that starting a recruiting company was what you wanted to do and what you would be good at? Like you mentioned before, how you were kind of doing the job almost before you ever started the company, which is a good sign that you're on the right track and you're doing something that you want to be doing. So, so maybe I just answered the question I was going to ask you, but I mean, like you clearly like recruiting. Like, I guess
Yes.
just talk about that. Why do you like it? Like, what do you like?
Well,
You're having fun,
I think
clearly.
Yeah, and everybody gets energy from different things, right? So I get energy from talking to people. I get energy from helping somebody in their career, right? So I don't know. I mean, even when I was a sales manager, I loved it when my sales executives made more money than me. Just keep motivated and keep. I had one guy one time from a Verizon wireless store. Today he leads a team of 50. So I don't know. I guess I'm weird that way. I just love just love making people better. It sounds corny, but I like it.
Yeah.
And then obviously I'm not gonna lie, I make a healthy living on it. So there's that too.
that helps.
Yeah,
that helps.
Definitely. Awesome. Rasmus, thanks for joining us today on the podcast. I really enjoyed it. Thanks for tuning in to the Daily Freight Caviar Podcast. If you enjoyed the podcast, or if you didn't, leave a review. Let me know what you think. I appreciate any feedback. If you'd like to have more Freight Caviar content, go to freightcaviar.com and subscribe to my email newsletter.